This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hello and welcome to the Extra Point Podcast. My name is Anna Blake and I'm the youth pastor here at Southridge Church. Joined with us today is Cheryl Ross, our Next Steps and Discipleship pastor. Cheryl got to teach the last sermon on our series, Rise and Fall, and it was a great way to wrap up what we had been learning about in the life cycle and story of King Saul and the upcoming King David and their relationship. Mm-hmm. So just to kind of give a snapshot, recall, what are some things that we really should be mindful of and reminded of from this Sunday teaching?
So from this Sunday, we talked a lot about living well and what that looks like, and dying well, and how they're kind of correlated, right? Like if you want to die well, you should live well, but really the key to living well is actually dying well, because we believe that we should die, to our old selves to step into that new life that Jesus has for us. Mm-hmm. Like it's that, that salvation. We say Jesus wants to make us new, but so we have to die to that old, right? And that's kind of the whole thing for the believer and a follower, but that's where we really saw the downfall, with Saul, was that he didn't know how to die to himself and die to what he wanted and how he wanted to do things and the things that he sought after. And he continued to go that way, where David, he was all about what was coming and what God wanted him to do. Yeah. And so that was kind of the basis of it, and kind of seeing how that can play out in our life, and how we really should think about who we want to be when the end comes and who we want to be remembered as. Yeah. It's kind of a somber, heavy teaching, because nobody wants to think about that, or we all probably think about the people that we have lost before and people that we know who maybe, if you've ever been to a funeral where there's like very few people, right? It's sad, mm-hmm. And nobody wants that. And so, the way that we live has the ability to impact people's lives. It's not just about us. And so when we're solely focused on ourselves and what we want and the way we want to do things, we lose sight of the fact that we impact people every single day, whether we want to or not, whether we realize it or not. The way that we interact with those around us matters. Yeah. And if you're not living well, which, when I think of living well, I don't think of just in a physical sense, I think of that spiritual and emotional wellness as well. Right. Like that if we're not well spiritually, then we could be the most fit physically. We could be the most successful in any other way. But if our spiritual or emotional health is not well, then we're not going to live well, no matter how those things look. And I think about how, with Jesus, there were times when he healed people, right? And he would ask them, he wouldn't say always, do you want to be healed? Mm-hmm. He would say, do you want to be made well? There was more underneath that word than just the physical healing. And so it's that living in right relation with God and others. And you have to be in a certain space, like a full wellness to do that.
Yeah. No, that's good. I think it was really, you're right, it was somber, and it did, if we allow it, it gave us an opportunity to really reflect on our own choices and lifestyles. And the reminder that Saul did not take the opportunity to right his life with God, but we still have that opportunity, is a really strong point and takeaway that was offered to us through the teaching and through the realities of what Saul ended up facing in his death. And now in his death, people were affected too. He was the king, and he was someone who was greatly praised and honored and appreciated. And he became something that maybe wasn't that later on. And so there were people responding to his passing in ways that mattered too.
Yeah.
So what were some of the ways that like the Philistines ended up, that's their arch enemy.
Right.
Arch enemy of Saul.
Yes.
How did they respond to Saul's death?
Yeah. So if you read the last bit of the chapter that I didn't get into, verses 8 through 13, it says that the next day the Philistines came to kind of go through the dead. This is what, like, in war they would do. You know, they'd go and plunder the bodies and all that, like to get whatever armor or things that they could collect to keep and use for themselves. And so in that, as they're stripping the dead, they come across Saul and his sons. And so, you know, if you think back, like in the teaching, I talked about how Saul was worried about what they would do to him.
Right.
You know, that they would torture him, that they would taunt him, like these kind of things. And it wasn't unfounded, because the Philistines find him, they decapitate him. Like, he's already dead. Why do you need to do that? You know?
Yeah.
But this is the thing that a lot of them would do, is that they would do this, and they would carry the heads back of some, to show, because that's a lot easier to carry, right, than a whole body. But they do that, but they don't leave the body. They take everything. They take his armor, his bodies, and they end up taking it to the pagan temple, and they celebrate in their pagan temple about Saul's death. And this was really, for them, it was kind of like a mockery against God, against Yahweh, because this is like, they knew this was Yahweh's anointed king, and he was defeated. And so they do this celebration, and they hang him up, they fasten him up on the walls along with his armor, as a way to kind of say, like, hey, we defeated you. Where's your God? And so then the people of Jabesh Gilead find out about this. And these were the people back in, I want to say it's maybe chapter 16. I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But no, I think it's a little further back. But one of the good things Saul did was he came across the people of Jabesh Gilead. It's a story of like the people who their enemy was going to take out their right eye. I don't know if you've been following along, you'll remember that story.
Yeah, early on.
It was the people of Jabesh Gilead. So Saul had come and he rescued them from their enemy in that. And it's one of those moments where, like, the Spirit of God comes on him, and he knows he's supposed to do this, and he goes and he defeats, you know, and it's a really cool story, like one of the few of Saul getting it right.
Yeah.
And so these people, it's not that they're going to do this just because, you know, oh, well, we can't let Saul be like that, but they also know this is a slight against our God. And so they go, and where Saul and his body is hung, I found this interesting, because I think this is one of those where God allows them to be successful in this, because God wants to make sure that they know, I am still Yahweh. I am still the God that is all powerful and whatever. Because where they hung him, it says the city of Bethshan, well, it was really high up, and it was in between two valleys. And it was like the Philistines had always kept control because of where it was located. You could always see the enemies coming easily. So you could easily defeat them before they got there. And it was like a really major stronghold. Like whoever held that held those valleys.
Sure.
And so the people of Jabesh Gilead, it says that their mighty warriors traveled through the night to take down the bodies of Saul and his sons and to bring them back and do what they needed to do in order to have a more proper burial for them. So they end up successful in this. And in that, God is doing this in a way to show and prove and make sure that they know that he is truly Yahweh.
Yeah.
That he does still reign and rule, even against the enemy. And so it's a pretty interesting thing. It just didn't really fit with what we were teaching yesterday necessarily, but I found in my studies and when I was going through the commentary of listening, like reading that, is that it wasn't just that it wasn't that they were like necessarily trying to honor Saul as king. Like they didn't look at him necessarily as this fallen hero. It wasn't like a thing like that, but it was a way that they knew this was a mockery of their God.
Yeah.
And they wanted to prove and show that their God was truly God.
Yeah.
And so God allowed them to be successful, because if you read through about where it's located and all of that,
It would be an impossible task.
Right? It's like something that you would send like a Navy SEAL team in for, right?
Yeah, wow.
Or something like that. Like, it's not something that like anybody could just do and be successful at. And so it was a pretty cool insight within that.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And I can see where, like, in studying that, really having eye-opening moments. Philistines, in all honesty, like, they had every right to feel angry and frustrated. They're enemies from the get, and that kind of behavior is probably on par. And I think that sometimes when we're going through, this is just like something I'm thinking through in this series, and as we wrap it up, when we go through difficulty and when we come out the other side, whether we come out with a win or a loss, like, we shouldn't be surprised when things continue to be difficult or when things are still ugly or whatever. Like, because I think that until we come face to face with Jesus and in the new creation he offers, like, man, things are broken, period. And it would feel like misery loves company to have a moment like this and to come across and go, no, we still need to make a difference. We still need to do the right thing, even though, like, the worst is still happening. And it's like compounding worse situations. Let's still do the right thing. And know that God can help us do the right thing. Like, he can make impossible situations possible for his good and for his glory. I think that's a really cool little tidbit. I appreciate that share. So we see how the enemy reacts to Saul's death. What about, David? David wasn't necessarily Saul's enemy. Right. But he ended up having a disconnected relationship with him through everything they've been through. Yeah. How does David respond to Saul's death?
Yeah. So this is a little teaser, because I know that we say we're going to study in 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel next year, but it'll be months down the road to give you all a break. But for a little teaser, because Saul viewed David as his enemy, even though David wasn't. But David never really saw him in that way, right? There were many times where he was like convicted, I shouldn't touch the Lord's anointed and all of this. But still, the normal person, I would say the average human being, when they're being treated in such a way by someone that they served faithfully, you know what I mean, for probably years, if in all reality, treating them that way, and they hear about this, like, oh, my enemy is finally, or this person who's been after me, who's been treating me wrongly, who's been, ran me out of my home, who, I had to hide my family from, all these things. You don't want to celebrate that. Like, I think there would be, but we don't see
like a
that.
sigh of relief or something.
Yeah. Like, yes. And now it's like, oh yes, I can be king. Like, now this all makes sense now, because for a while it didn't make sense to David, because he didn't necessarily know that he was going to be the next king. And so now it's probably like one of those where it's starting to make sense, and and the average person would be like, okay, here's my moment. Like, but David doesn't do that. He actually he mourns Saul's death, and he actually writes, it's really interesting, he writes a funeral song for Saul.
Wow.
And for, Jonathan and his sons. And it's a beautiful song. Like, he says how beloved and gracious were Saul and Jonathan. They were together in life and in death. They were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. Like, I think those type of things are not things that we would say about those, like, the people that have done us wrong in our life, and I think that just shows even more how much David is sold out to, like, living well. Only a spiritually, emotionally healthy person could react in such a way to that.
Yes.
Could actually decide to say, even though this person treated me like this, I'm going to honor them in the way that they should be honored, in the way that even if I don't feel like they deserve it, I'm going to. Yeah. And so I think that is a beautiful lesson too, to just remember that in life and death, like, I think back, I shared the story about my dad in the beginning, and it was one of those that like I was able to honor him in death, like at his death and in his funeral, because of the changes that he made and some of the things that had been restored. Like, but David didn't get that. You know what I mean? He didn't have a moment of reconciliation with Saul beforehand. And I think it's difficult to do, like really difficult to do.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy for me, like it by no means. Like the only reason I was able to do that and get through that was because of God.
Right.
But I think for the average person, it is a call to, rise above what's average. Like, rise above what might seem normal to, someone who doesn't believe, who doesn't have that hope and peace and life that Christ can only give. Like, and that's the kind of thing, though, that gives witness and testimony to those around us that can impact them positively, is when we decide that we're going to go away from what, like, the normal person might do, and we do something different, something that makes them pause and say, wait, like, how can you act like that or think that way or be okay with this even after all this? I think that's what shows how strong the gospel of Jesus Christ is to those around us. Yeah. It's in those moments that we have an opportunity to do that. And we see David do that.
Yeah. David definitely demonstrates that God is alive and working in his life through the way he reacts. We see it, the entire picture, but really, I do think it's very bold here as we move into the second book there, and to see how David responds to the death of someone who many would consider an enemy of his is substantially different than we probably would, like you said. And it also just really shines a light on how God can change the way we see things, change the way we respond to things when we're really sold out to him, when our life is being lived well in and through him. And I think that is a challenge for all of us. Coming to the end of this series, coming to the end of this episode, are there any thoughts, next steps, challenges that you can think of for us as we step into this week and the weeks to come?
Yeah. I think in closing, I would just say, like, think back on, if you've been with us through the whole series, like, think back on some of those key moments. Because I think as time goes by, like, maybe we have a really, like, convicting moment or a moment where we realize, oh, yeah, I need to do better here, and I'm going to make some changes. But as time goes, like, we often forget about those things if they're not held in front of us. So I think going back and seeing some of those, remembering some of those key moments, take some time to just really sit and self-reflect and ask yourself, like, where am I in all of this? Am I still the same person as I was 6 months ago? I know a lot of people don't like change and think change is scary, or they get upset when they know people change, but like, we should be continually changing if we're following Jesus. Is that in that following him, we get closer to him, and as we get closer to him, as we get to know God better, as we get to do these things, then it should change us. Like, it should change us. And so, really the key question I would have is, like, where have you changed? That's and good. If you haven't, if there's no area of your life, no discipline or no anything that you have changed or done better at, like, then really take a moment to see where you can. Because I do think that there should be some level of change, of difference in your life. And it's something, though, that, like, Pastor Scott, myself, all the others who have taught during this series, we can't make you change. Right. And I shared some about that burden that I felt yesterday. When you come to a close of a series like this that has had so much, like, just practical application from the way that we respond to people, all those things, there's that burden that, like, hey, we've been doing this for 6 months. Is anybody different? Like, has there been any, impact at all for this? And we know, like, there's nothing we can do. Like, it's not in our power. And it is literally, I said yesterday, the only one who can change you is you. At the end of the day, you have nobody else to blame, nothing else to blame except yourself. And that's a dark reality.
Yeah.
But it's also something that, like, once you realize that, then you can put the excuses aside. You can put all that aside and say, okay, from here on, it's me. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Like, I'm going to stop doing this. I'm going to try better here. And just remember, though, that there is grace. Like,
right.
Pastor Scott has talked many times before about the difference of using God's grace and abusing God's grace. It's there to use for those moments when you're trying and you still fail.
Yeah.
But it's not there for you to just do whatever you want and expect it to be there.
Right.
So remember that it is a journey. It is an experience you're going to have those moments. It's going to be up and down, but hopefully the overall is an upward thing.
Yeah. No, I agree. Thank you so much for that, because I think that is a good question. Like, how are you changing? Where is transformation happening? And if it's not, let's figure out why.
Yeah.
And let's figure out what to do next.
Yeah.
I think that's so powerful and can really change lives now and forever, for living well now and dying well later. I'm so looking forward to what's to come in the next few weeks as we continue to dive into God's Word together on Sundays. Make sure you're sticking with this podcast to get all the extra points from Sunday teachings, and you can subscribe, you can follow along and share with a friend who maybe needs the encouragement to live well today and to have a life that dies well in the future, where you can say, God did this, and God is in charge, and He's able to change what's happening around here in your life and the lives of others. We love you, we appreciate you, and we can't wait to see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.